it's going to be an ever evolving strategy and process. Like what I tell my team is data governance is never going to end. It's going to continue, continue, and continue because our data evolves. We get more and more information. We're going to continue to think about other things that would enhance our data or information. So just really having a base of how you would approach data governance is going to be a good start. And then you can start to build upon that.
My name's Tom Baldwin. This is Overruled by Data, the podcast for law firms looking to start their data journey or accelerate the journey they're already on. Brought to you by Integrata. Today's guest helps one of the largest law firms in the world turn raw data into business insight. Jennifer Mapp is the Senior Director of Data Management and Analytics at Morgan Lewis, where she leads a team that collects, prepares, and presents data for firm decision-making and advanced analytics in support of legal services and core business objectives. She previously led pricing and project management at another Am Law 50 firm and brings a rigorous financial and operational lens to data. Her work sits within an organization investing seriously in AI readiness and responsible adoption, from strategic partnerships with Thomson Reuters that gives lawyers early access to AI-driven products, to a firm-wide AI task force and cross-functional collaboration models that align use cases, governance, and risk management. Jen, welcome to Overruled by Data.
Thank you, Tom, and thanks for that introduction. Thanks for having me.
So we always like to start these off with a little bit of background on our guest and kind of what brought you to data. So, if you could just sort of give us a sense of your pathway into legal data, a little bit of your personal background and journey. What was your path from where you started to get you to where you are now, focusing on legal data?
Sure. So I started at another firm in the Philadelphia area, Deckert. I started there in their pricing and project management department. I recently graduated from business school with a degree in MBA in finance. And I really wanted to get outside of just traditional accounting roles and more into a financial analysis role. And there was a role available at Deckert where they were starting a pricing and project management department. So I started there in that department, and eventually, after about 5 years, left that department and that firm to move to Morgan Lewis in more of a revenue management role. And I think that really helped me into the data management and analytics role that I'm in today, because it allowed for me to work with a lot of different practices. At Deckert, that role was more of a centralized role that worked with all of the practices in terms of helping put together budgets, putting together pricing models, as well as when I got to Morgan Lewis and worked in revenue management, it was really spanning all of the different practices. And I think that helped me really understand not only things about pricing structures, financial models, things that I had a lot of experience with in terms of my finance background, but also all of the different aspects of legal services there are, how it can affect staffing models, fee structures, thinking about, the work expectations, scope, legal strategy, staffing. I think all of that information and having to understand, as much as I could about that information to help put together those budgets, those pricing models, really led me to understand all of the intricacies and ins and outs of data that a firm will have on their clients and on their matters. And so I really think that helped me have that understanding, but also it helped me learn how important it is to present data, how important it is to communicate the results and the insights that people can take away and take action on. Because as business teams who are very familiar with data, we're in information, numbers, day to day, and we don't really sometimes think about communicating that information to an end user and giving that information to them and sort of saying what the action is or the ask is after sort of a high level review of that information. So I think, working in pricing, revenue management, that really helped me because it not only had the financial acumen of what the expectations are at a law firm, but also all of the information associated with clients and matters, what's important to legal teams and attorneys, and how to present that information in the best way.
It's interesting you talk about sort of that last mile of presentation. I think as numbers people, we sometimes forget who the consumers are, right? They don't have an MBA most of the time. And when you think about that journey, what did that experience in pricing and revenue management teach you about data quality, how you drive adoption and usage? Because it's one thing just to provide a mountain of data to a lawyer. It's another thing that they actually open it, read it, and then take the action that you were hoping they'd take.
Right, right. Well, with pricing, we had to be, and it was never perfect or 100% in terms of, our financial models, our profitability models, but we had to be as accurate as possible and make sure that we created really solid business roles when we were modeling different types of rate structures and financial arrangements. So those were making sure that the data was correct. We had business rules around what our model looked like. That was really important with pricing, especially to make sure that we're managing financial expectations that the firm expects for those different arrangements. Adoption also was extremely important. I mean, when I started in pricing and revenue management, it was a new function for the firm. So having solid information and data was really important to make sure that we were seen as credible. That's really important to adoption as well, because if you're giving a lot of information that doesn't seem correct, it's going to be less adopted than anything that you're putting forward or putting in front of an attorney or a legal team. So we really had to be solid on those business rules for adoption, but also thinking about how to not overcomplicate information that's provided. How do we provide results? How do we welcome feedback so that we can use that to modify sort of the model and make sure that it's presenting the results that they're expecting? So it was something that we really had to think about in terms of adoption. I think about that a lot here at Morgan Lewis, is how do we get adoption for things that are new, ideas that are new, that may seem a little bit challenging into the firm. We conduct a lot of proof of concepts. That's something that we do at the firm a lot at Morgan Lewis, to show what an investment in organizing and providing data could look like for an end user, so that even if it may be a fake data set, they can see if this data set was collected on a regular basis, we can provide you with these results that you can utilize for conversations with your clients or ways to gain new client work. So that's worked really well for us in terms of adoption, to assist with some of our continued data collection and validation efforts.
I love that. That's a really cool idea. I might circle back on that if we get time.
Yeah, definitely.
One of the other things I always like to ask folks is the moment where you thought, gosh, data needs to be a core capability for us and not just an afterthought. Was there like an aha moment where you weren't able to turn around something fast enough, or the data was wrong because it wasn't tied out to something that you could rely on? Do you have a moment like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it has always been a priority in the minds of all of the business teams and legal teams at the firm. I think the moment where it really clicked for us that it had to be more of a structured approach to data management and data governance was when we felt the need to expand our knowledge management program. And we needed to continue to support our attorneys and clients with the information on our experience, to connect that data with other data sources for different needs. And so we realized that if we did want to expand the ability to share our experience with our attorneys, with our clients, we really had to focus on the data, working closely on business rules, data quality, risks related to sharing information, and again, how we present that data in a more normalized, concise way. So we identified during that process the need for a structured data governance program, a data dictionary to even identify all the data points that the different users work with, what those data points mean, who owns that information, what systems that data sits in. And that would also help us identify where there may be some issues, where we may need to conduct some data cleanup projects, or just understand the flow of information and change the flow if there are some issues with the way the data is being presented and it's incorrect or inaccurate. So that part of that knowledge management program really helped us start to structure how we wanted to manage and look at data, not just within the knowledge management team, but across business teams. And so that data governance program, that is consistent of multiple business teams who work in different systems. They work with different data that may not be owned by knowledge management, but it is data that's utilized across different business teams with attorneys for different use cases. So we felt the need that those teams would need to collaborate more and to clearly define the data that they own, that other users could be working with. And especially now with the expansion of AI, bringing AI tools on, it's really important that, we wanted to make sure we had our data in order, or those tools wouldn't be helpful with the bad data that we have. So that was really the point that clicked for us, that we needed to have a more structured approach to our data management.
And that was at Morgan Lewis, right? So even before then, was there a time at Deckert where you had that same sort of aha moment where like you didn't have what you needed and that was a lightning rod for you?
Yeah, I think so. And, it was very interesting. As I mentioned, it was a new function at Deckert. So there were a lot of things that we didn't know that we needed. And we sort of, along the way of developing financial models, thinking about our profitability model to start to build out these rate structures, there are a lot of things that we had to learn on the fly to be able to get to the place where when I left Deckert, we were able to pull historic matters, look at those matters with the legal team's budget for, upcoming work. So I think the point that it probably clicked was when the firm, before I joined the firm, realized that they needed to stand up that pricing and project management function because it was needed. Clients were asking for different types of fee structures. They wanted more insight into the work that was being done on their cases and their matters. And I think it really clicked for the firm when clients were coming to them with those requests. And that sort of made them say, okay, we really need a dedicated function for, not just helping us set rates, but think about how we would budget our matters, what type of assumptions should go into that, how we develop that and present that to clients, and how we manage that ultimately moving forward.
We could probably spend a whole hour on this, but I have one off script question for you, which is more and more firms are thinking about pricing functions, trying to set up pricing functions. In fact, I think you and I first met when we were both doing pricing many moons ago. If you had like one or two pearls of wisdom for somebody setting up a pricing function for the first time at their firm, what would they be?
I mean, I guess it would be to just start somewhere, right? Like you're not going to be able to tackle knowing how to set up a budget or a pricing arrangement for every type of engagement that comes to the firm. But I think, and also maybe starting with someone, a partner, a champion who, has a client that, like I said, they may be asking for budgets or more sophisticated pricing arrangements. Start there, see sort of what you can do in terms of, working with that partner or that attorney to think about, are there like kind cases that we can model this after, thinking about how you can set up those pricing models, right? And think about, it doesn't need to be necessarily overcomplicated. A lot of the work that we did was in Excel, right? But we were able to put together just generally, okay, think about just using business rules and just business terms. How can we think about revenue, costs, profit, but then also, like I said, working maybe with that attorney or that partner to think about, okay, well, let's talk through this. What could lead to some work out of scope or going over budget? Like, what are things that we would need to consider? And helping develop that kind of mindset, I think, is important because that's going to translate to other practices, other types of work, even if it's different types of work, but thinking about what that assessment would look like to be able to put together something that, like I said, may be just starting in Excel and make it more and more sophisticated as you learn more.
So switching gears, I always like to ask folks the things that they're most proud of. Was there a North Star project or an analytics or data management initiative that clearly changed how teams or folks in leadership roles at the firm made decisions?
Yeah, so
Data.
that was the North Star project for me at Morgan Lewis, I would say, was when we implemented our business intelligence dashboards at the firm, not only to our managing partners, but also to all of our partners and our associates on things like utilization. And what we realized early on when I started at the firm in a different role in revenue management is that a lot of the business teams who were conducting the financial reporting, the analysis, were doing it in a very manual way. They were writing code. It would take them hours and hours to create an analysis or a report, which would take away from the time that they would be able to provide some insight into the information and really review the information and then give the requester not just the information to review, but here's what we see in terms of trends. That's, about clients or, the work that's being done in a particular practice month over month. And we quickly realized that there needed to be a more advanced tool put into place that not only one set the same rules regardless of who was in the tool, because what we would also find is that if you got a report from one team and you asked the same question and got a report from a different team, it could be two completely different answers. So we realized that that's a problem, right? So we had to take a step back, set those rules for, all of that financial information so that we were all on the same page, but then look into, are there some tools that we can put into place that would make it easy for that business team who's doing all of that reporting and writing code to more easily pull the information, be able to drill down into real-time information more quickly, and then be able to spend more time on providing those insights to the requesters. And so we looked at some different tools. We utilize Click as our business intelligence dashboards. And we went through the process of really thinking through how we would want to set the information up, making sure that it wasn't overcomplicated, but we had a lot of different views with a lot of different data points that are usually asked for by, managing partners or responsible partners on their clients, and then took a lot of detailed time to put together something, to put it in their hands, to conduct training, so that now it's more easier to pull information, answer questions, be proactive with different insights for different reasons, like business development or managing operations of a practice. And so, what we've heard and we get continuous feedback on is now it's just so much easier to get into the information. It helps with quicker decision making, and it makes, the information that they're trying to review less static and more interactive.
One of the things that our crack agent of researchers dug up about you was a presentation you did at Legal Week talking about curating metadata, both internally and externally. Is there a project there that you'd be willing to talk about where you kind of operationalize that metadata concept with internal, external, and matter profiling? This is a topic other guests have talked about, which is the holy grail of getting data passively collected about what we know about a matter or a client or a person.
So through that knowledge management program that we were expanding, I guess about 5 years ago now, we recognize that we also have resources available that we can utilize to pull in metadata about our matters, to give us more information about our experience. It's very difficult. Attorneys are very busy. It's very difficult to be able to have them fill out a form or sit and have an interview with them or tell me, send me all of your documents and we'll go through them and pull all that metadata out. And there are some resources that we can utilize that have already done some of that work for us. So we utilize one of our resources specific to litigation to see what data they had available via an API and how could we pull that data in, connect that data to our internal matters so that we did have a lot of that enhanced information, that enhanced profile experience to be able to present to our attorneys. We worked with the consultant, but we also pulled in an ETL program that would help us build business logic to basically match the information that we had in this litigation resource with our internal dockets. So we used, of course, some data points like docket numbers or case numbers, case names, jurisdictions. Those were all data points that particular source had available. Those are all data points we have internally available through our docketing system and our docketing process. And we thought about how do we build some business logic in the event that the data that we're keeping internally may be a little bit inaccurate. Maybe a number is missing, a letter is missing from our docket number. But if we have some other data points like a case name, like a jurisdiction, and that seems to match what we're finding through this other third-party resource, that's probably the right case. So we were able to come up with and develop some business logic that would connect that information and then go through an approval process to review information that's brought in and kind of sign off and say, okay, that looks right, that looks right, that looks right. And then we were able to push that into our internal experience management database, which is Foundation. So we went through a long process of doing that. And I know a lot of companies know how to do that now. They're presenting, things like matter connectors, things like that, which I wish we would have had, 3-4 years ago when we were building all of this internally. But it was, good experience to even get into the data, understand the data even more to be able to put that process together. And now we're able to use that process to refresh that data on a daily basis. So now we have, information on over 15,000 cases on our matters about judges we were in front of, courts we were in front of, motions that happened for particular, litigations, results of those litigations, outcomes. And that's really helped to enhance a lot of the information that we have, where we can even still work with a partner, an attorney, and just say, does this information seem correct, or is there anything else you want to add to that? And it's usually a great starting point to work with attorneys to then continue to add even more information that may not be available in that resource. So that was, one of the really concrete examples that we've utilized that has really just been enhanced. And we did a lot of as well mapping on the back end to ensure that had normalized lists of courts, judges. We didn't have, the 5 names for one particular court. All of that information is more easily searchable. It's more easily usable. So we also, with that sort of external data, bringing that in, we also thought about how do we make sure that that data comes in normalized and more concise so that it's easy to present and to search on.
With all the different, this is amazing, by the way, thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
With all the different programs you have in place, how are you measuring impact to the firm? Are you looking at adoption? Are you looking at time to insight, accuracy, at any kind of revenue metrics? How are you looking at the overall kind of efficacy of your efforts?
So we look at a couple of different things. I mean, we don't really look at necessarily revenue, but we do look at some KPIs like how many users we have, how many searches we have month over month. And a lot of times we look at some qualitative information too, but we do regularly look at, usage of our platform, the number of matter profiles and client profiles we're able to enhance, how much third-party data we're able to bring in and integrate into our database. We look at matter profiling efforts. So as we go practice through practice and start to work with some of those leaders to start to collect more information about our matters and enhance our matters, what does that look like in terms of how many matters is that group enhancing just through discussions or them filling out a survey? But we also look at, and it helps us understand the breadth of information that we have and that we can provide to our attorneys, those different KPIs. We also try to get a lot of qualitative feedback from attorneys and business teams just to understand if the information is helpful, if it's useful. We just want to make sure, that they are able to utilize the information for their needs, their inquiries, their use cases. We also want to know how easy it is to get to the information now that we're collecting it, we're storing it, we're providing it in some downstream systems. So we really try to get that feedback as well to understand, are the things that we're doing, does it make sense? Is it helpful? Does it make things more efficient for the individuals who need that information? We also want to continue to understand, are there any gaps we can solve for? So those are things that we also look at in addition to a lot of those different KPI metrics in terms of, the information that's being provided.
Thank you for that. That's really cool. So we talked about stuff that you're proud of. I also, again, the spirit of this show is really to help educate folks and give folks a glimpse into what to do and some things, what not to do. And so when you look back at your career working with data, we want to kind of talk about maybe some things you would do differently, some opportunities for a pivot or a miss, just flat out something that you whiffed on, which, look, I've done plenty of that in my career. What was like for you when you all think about AI readiness? Was there a piece that you underestimated?
I think there definitely was a piece that we underestimated. I would say it was a lot of governance, and I think that was most underestimated, and probably not even just as part of AI readiness, but just when we started our knowledge management program. I think, having people take ownership of data is really difficult when they necessarily haven't taken full ownership of it, and that's really needed for the development of AI tools and just generally using more and more information. So, having people take ownership of data, establishing, data stewards at the firm, like having standards, having policies and security controls, that's really underestimated, but it's extremely important to be ready to utilize AI.
It's such a hard thing because I do think that firms understand the importance of governance. And in some firms I've talked to, they actually lead with governance before they touch a single piece of data, which I would argue maybe is a bit overkill. But what's a realistic or governance in practice inside a law firm that is workable and sustainable?
We recognized the need for a more structured data governance effort. And I think that, what's workable is making sure that you have those things like data owners taking ownership of their data sets, having data stewards, data champions, having a lot of, processes developed, best practices developed are really important to make sure. And those are all things that are in data owners' minds, but making sure that you have that sort of established and set, and you go back to that when you're working with different data sets or different teams, or standing up a new tool, or just trying to make sure that a tool that you've always been utilizing is working for the firm and working for the team that needs it. Making sure that, you develop processes to assess data requirements when new tools are being developed, meeting regularly. My team meets regularly to discuss data projects, data issues, the need for normalization of certain data sets. Sometimes we had to take a new lens to when we may turn around and make a decision that's completely different than we did initially. But when we continue to think about it and talk about it, it'll only help make sort of our data model, our data operating model better. And like I said, we've developed processes to assess data. We've tried to think about how do we tackle normalized data sets, normalized lists, list by list, like court lists, office locations, all things that you would imagine would be normalized, but are not necessarily, especially across different systems. And us being such a big firm, we have so many systems, so many different silos of information. Really trying to get to that information and making sure we apply those standards is really important. It takes a long time. And we also identify priorities for cleaning up data. That's really important to think about. What's the important data that you really need, that is frequently asked for, that's frequently needed to help with different things, like I said, like business development, like just operations of a particular practice, or a client just asking us, do we have experience in this jurisdiction? So that's really important to think about, like what those priorities are for looking at information, cleaning that up, and collaborating with those data owners on the best approach for cleaning that up and implementing correct processes moving forward to keep that data as clean as possible.
If there was a project you could redo or rewind in a data initiative that you do differently, either in terms of the way you scoped it, the sequencing of it, tooling, or any of those things, what would you do differently? There was one you had to take back or redo.
So one that comes to mind was a piece of our implementation of our experience management database. We were taking data from the existing database and, moving that over and importing that. There was one particular data set that we didn't take a lot of time to, I would say, address the data issues within that data set. And we kind of just moved that data over thinking, okay, well, it's just as clean, or just as, not because everything's not super clean at all, but it kind of models the same data that we've already moved over. So there shouldn't be any issues. And didn't realize until we moved that information over that no, it completely came over, completely different. We didn't review it enough to make sure that some of this information really shouldn't have been brought over, or was incorrect, or just in a format that didn't make sense for the way that we brought it over. So it took a lot of efforts after that to make that data fit into the experience database. It took a lot of, just sort of auditing, making changes and things like that. But it did, I think, help us identify when we're working on this type of projects moving forward. It's really important to sit with the information, understand it, see what's the best fit or what's the best place and format for that before anything is sort of moved over into some other database or some other file, to really come up with a real thorough strategy and embed yourself in the information so that you know what's the right way to handle it moving forward. So that on the other side, you don't have to spend so much manual time cleaning it up. And that really helped, I think, with future projects, now understanding if there is some sort of process that we have to move data from one place to another, let's really immerse ourselves in the information, understand what makes sense, what format it makes sense in, and how it could translate to similar types of data that's already there, and maybe how do we handle that in a more concise way that it's not so disconnected.
Makes sense. And foundation projects are tricky anyway,
yes,
right? Very never straightforward.
Very tricky.
Most firms there's this continual ebb and flow of buy versus build. And a firm like Morgan Lewis, you're one of the largest law firms in the world. You've got more resources than a lot of firms, but yet you still have a lot of strategic partnerships, and you've been very thoughtful about that. How do you all make the decision to buy, build, or co-develop?
That's a great question. I mean, we try not to build too much. What we always tell ourselves is we're not a technology company, we're a law firm, but we recognize the need for the ability to build things internally where needed. We do have a group that there are digital transformation and user experience team. And for new requests of some sort of tool that may be client facing or maybe internal, they go through an assessment of what the requirements are. Are there tools that we already have available to us internally that could handle the need? Does the need cross different practices or is it very specific and niche? And they go through an assessment process where, they think about that, how much that would cost if we would build that internally, and go through sort of an approval process if the decision is, yes, this would be good to build internally. But we try to avoid as much as possible building more and more tools and really think about, are there tools that we could utilize that we already have available to us? Or is there something out there that could meet the needs of something that we would want to develop or customize? And can we scale that so that it is not only for one specific niche use case, but it can be utilized for multiple use cases across different practices. So it can be on a case by case basis, but if there's anything that's going to be rolled out firm wide and something we see that this would be great for the entire firm and really meet needs that we don't have from with our internal tools or something that we could build internally, then we may look to partner with a vendor and buy something.
Shifting gears to kind of looking ahead, right? And this is always such a tough thing to crystal ball anything past, 6, 12 months. But as you look at the future of data, analytics, and AI, what are you seeing if we start with the skills and teaming? What skills for lawyers and for business professionals do you see in the next 12 months becoming really important?
So, I mean, I think for lawyers, I think the skills are just going to be learning how to make, AI tools beneficial for what they're doing. I was on a great webinar yesterday about prompting and the secret to prompting with AI tools. And I think that that's going to be really important for, lawyers, professionals as well, to really have education around what AI tools are available, what AI tools do for, and how that can support, their practice, what they're working on, their client work, what the risk is around utilizing those AI tools, but really making those AI tools work for them for those specific use cases, and understanding how to interact with those different tools is going to be really important. And I think that's why a lot of firms, as I've seen, focus a lot on education around AI, just what all of these different sort of AI tools could do, what all of these different terminologies are when it comes to AI. As I mentioned, a great webinar that Thomson Reuters had yesterday was about prompting and how to unlock your prompting skills. So really getting a lot of that knowledge and education and figuring out how AI tools can work for them and help them is going to be really beneficial for them, and give them, what they're hoping is more time for, case strategy, other high level tasks, is what, we're hoping that, those tools that we utilize will do for our attorneys and our legal teams. So I think that that's going to be really important. But there's also going to be a lot of synergies. It's going to continue between different departments, knowledge management, finance, business development, because, those tools are going to require, depending on, what a firm is building. But if it's definitely utilizing internal data, it's going to be data from a lot of different teams, data owners that utilize that data. And that data is going to need to be centrally located and connected and credible for any tools that are being either, developed on top of the firm's data, or they're just utilizing the firm's data. So continued collaboration across those departments is going to be extremely important to be able to collaborate and be AI ready for our attorneys and the tools that we're using.
When you think about practical advice, you mentioned earlier, like with the pricing function, just start small, get going, and don't worry about it being perfect right out of the gate. This is a problem. Like when you work in legal, the idea that something's not going to be perfect is a hard thing, right? We're trained, right, from birth, whether you are a lawyer or working in a law firm in a support capacity, it's got to be perfect. And so firms really kind of grind themselves down to the bone to figure out, like, I've got to have this perfect before I get started. For firms that are kind of in that mode where they are waiting for perfection, what would be your message?
Same. It's not going to be perfect when you start, but you have to start somewhere. So I think that you can just start small by identifying one problem, one data issue that may come up frequently, one data set issue that may come up frequently, that if there was some way to fix it and there was some process that could be put in place that would make that data correct, more credible, then, you can think about what that would look like. Thinking about then, if you find sort of, like I said, one data point, one data set, start to think about, how you would assess making that data better. Think about where the data lives, what downstream systems it does or doesn't feed into, how you can address the data issue, what could be a process to put in place for maintaining the data more accurate moving forward. So starting small, thinking about, one place to start, that will really help set the base for thinking about data governance as a whole and creating a strategy. And then that will allow you to have that strategy in place to then start to go into other areas to help manage the information more accurately. There are going to be times where strategy has to be adjusted, just depending on, like I said, you could start somewhere, then realize that's not going to be the right process, or the process can't be the same for every data point, every data set, because it's different because of different systems, different people who, own that information. But just having a base of, I need to think about processes, where that data lives, what downstream systems that data feeds into, that will really help set the base for having a strategy. And then moving forward with, like I said, thinking about other priorities, other data sets, and then it's going to be an ever evolving strategy and process. Like what I tell my team is, data governance is never going to end. It's going to continue, continue because our data evolves. We get more and more information. We're going to continue to think about other things that would enhance our data or information. So just really having a base of how you would approach data governance is going to be a good start. And then you can start to build upon that.
Kind of taking that topic and double clicking on it a little bit. You mentioned in a previous talk or article this concept of trigger-based capture and incremental centralization of data for reuse. So if someone said, hey, in 90 days, I want to be able to demonstrate something, what's a small concrete action a firm could take, whether it's locking in the taxonomy for a very small subset of a practice for capturing area of law or high volume matters, or defining authoritative sources for 5 golden records? What would be a thing that you might suggest a firm look at doing so they can put a little meat on the bone from hey, I told you we're going to start small. Here's something we did, and show a small win in 90 days.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that, taxonomies are great. I mean, that's a great place to start, to really come up with taxonomies, normalize lists of information, and applying that to, your current data sets to show, okay, now this information, it is more easily sort of categorized, more easily to search on. I think with, as an example, things like matter profiling, that is a really difficult feat. I know for a lot of firms, you could start with one type of work, 3 to 5 data points that you could work with an attorney on. And, I go back to that proof of concept idea, putting something together to say, okay, if we started with this one type of work, let's say we were able to collect these 3 to 5 data points and we had data for, 100 matters. Look what we could produce to you that you could utilize in any of your conversations, your inquiries, you just understanding sort of what's happening with your portfolio of work. That really has been, like I said, very helpful for us, because once they sort of see that end result, it sort of clicks that, okay, this makes sense, that we should start collecting this data, and let me help you with the process of doing that. So I think that's something really easy you could do, in the first 90 days, 3 months. You could say, let's start with one type of work, one attorney, and then once you start to show that, and especially to other attorneys or other practices, then the light bulb starts to go off and say, oh, this would be really great if we had something like this on our type of information, right? And now we know that there are processes in place to do that, and there will be some end result of us sort of spending time to collect that information or work with that team to collect that information. So I would say start small. Same thing, with the data strategy. Find something a champion that, was always wanted to be able to do something like collecting matter data or come up with a more normalized, concise list for courts in their SharePoint site that they manage their data in, whatever that thing would be that would sort of be the, oh, this is what's in it for me sort of end result is really helpful. And that starts momentum on being able to continue those efforts.
Last question. Lots of firms come up with a multi-year roadmap for data. They hire a consultant or they come up with their own strategy. But along the way, you've got to show those near-term warrants. Any rule of thumb for how you sequence projects and expand with analytics or AI on top of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, data projects, they're never ending. The roadmap is infinite. So I think that, I go back to that idea of prioritizing what's important. What's the important information that your team or the firm wants to prioritize to get right, and use that as like the first quick win, right? If it is something like we don't have all the information about clerkships for all of our staff, and we want to be able to get that, our attorneys, and we want to be able to get that information more easily. Okay, well, start with that as a first project for a quick win, but continue to have a larger data roadmap that would, and usually that first project quick win probably points you to the next right project, because clerkship data is personnel data, it's attorney data. Attorney data is important to get right because, we are selling our experience, our services to get client work. And we need to have experience about our attorneys and our legal staff correct so that we can present our experience in the way that we need to either maintain our current client work or get new client work. That could help, that first quick win could help you get to, okay, we need to, as a next sort of larger project, start with attorney data, and let's make sure that we have all of that right and all the systems that touches for all of those different use cases. So that will really set the stage for future projects. And then taking the time to determine, how you should organize your data. Like I said, taxonomies, naming conventions, that's all really important. It's going to be beneficial. It's going to be needed for any AI tools or analytics to be helpful in the end. So all of that upfront work is going to be really important. But the roadmap's infinite. There will always be different data sets that you'll come across. There'll always be ways that you can enhance your information. So just continuing to think about what you high level want your focus to be. If it's enhancing your matter information and client information, if it's cleaning up data as well, if it's making sure that you're pushing data into the right systems, having those high level goals, and then understanding how you get to those goals and what the priorities are, I think that will set your multi-year data roadmap, but also allow you to have some quick wins internally.
Well, Jen, thank you so much for sharing your journey and insights with us today. That's it for this episode. For those of you listening, if you enjoyed the conversation, hit that subscribe button so you never miss another episode. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Overruled by Data.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me.
That's a wrap for this episode of Overruled by Data. If this podcast resonated with you, if you took one or two things away from it, you want to hear more from law firm leaders that have been there and done that, hit the follow button.